Thank you for coming out. Thank you to SMU for this opportunity and for the opportunities that I've had in my time here. SMU has been very generous in allowing me to be off for a semester and in Australia studying autonomous weapons. And I spent last year on leave from the university working up in the Pentagon as the special counsel to the general counsel for the Department of Defense, and was able to be part of delegations representing the U.S. on discussions on autonomous weapons. So SMU, both the law school and Dean Collins and the provost and President Turner have been very generous in allowing faculty the flexibility to be away, to have other experiences, and it's certainly been, they were certainly very useful for me. So today we're going to talk generally about some of the legal ramifications of increased technological autonomy, focusing primarily on driverless cars, but discussing some other technologies. And you'll notice here the decided lack of a steering wheel in our open car. So we'll talk about that car and if and when, I think it's more a question of when, we might actually be seeing that car. So I'll first want to talk about some tensions, because I think this discussion is really all about varying tensions, varying balances that are at issue. I think we want to be on the same page, at least as to what I'm talking about. I think everyone who's probably speaking today at this summit is probably giving you, here's what AI means, here's what autonomy means, and that's part of the challenge in these discussions. So I'll give you my version, or at least how I'm using it. And it's not that my version is better or worse than Fred Chang's, but we have different versions and different uses for our working definitions. Again, we'll talk mostly about driverless cars, a little bit about aerial systems. When are we going to get drone? When is Amazon delivering Amazon Prime Air packages here in Dallas or elsewhere? And then a little bit about some other applications: robotic surgery, robotic pharmacists. So just as an overview of some tensions that I would ask you to think through, and I should have said at the outset, by all means, at any time, if you have a question, if I'm speaking too fast, I've been away from I left the Pentagon about 6 weeks ago, so I'm doing better at not slipping into acronym speak, which I had gone right back into when I was back up in DC. But if I'm speaking too quickly, if I'm using an acronym, or if you have a question or comment, by all means, please raise your hand. My student evaluations thus far, the only question that I get 100% results on is can be heard. So I'm optimistic that it won't have any problem with you being able to hear me, but again, if there's any issues, please just raise your hand and let me know. So what are some of these tensions? Well, we have a tension between the role of government, both state and federal, and the interests of us as individuals and us as commercial actors. Particularly in both driverless cars and in the aerial delivery, we see that we have some tensions between what is it that the state is and should be regulating, what is it that the federal government is and should be regulating. I think increasingly we're going to have some internecine commercial on commercial, not violence, but litigation. And here what I'm speaking of is litigation is like, matter is neither created, matter just shifts, and in this case, litigation is just going to shift. So one of the things that we'll talk about driverless cars is I think the litigation is going to shift internal to the supply distribution chain for a car manufacturer, and more so than it is currently with you to sue the driver of the car that was involved in the accident. And then we have some kind of personal tensions that we might all do. I think we all do this math a little differently. How important is convenience to you? How important is ease of using something? Contrast that with what risks are you willing to accept in terms of the system being hacked? And what is your attitude towards human performance, human fallibility, and machine performance, and machine, if not fallibility, then machine error. In my research and in my study, I believe that as a general view, humans have a very rosy sense of our own performance, and we have a somewhat irrational concern or fear about machine performance, even when that machine performance, frankly, far outperforms humans. Now, humans are free to have that view, but it'll just be interesting to see how those views translate into the fielding and the commercial application of some of these systems. Oops, sorry. So just a little bit on what I mean by autonomy, and as I mentioned, you would have heard some or all of these terms, or you'll hear them throughout the morning and into the afternoon. All these terms all have obviously meanings. They have somewhat slightly different meanings depending on the use or the application and what someone is doing with them. My focus is on autonomy. What do I mean by autonomy? I frankly am just talking about autonomy in terms of we have humans, we have machines, and with our increasing technological capabilities, we are able to increase and differentiate the tasks that we are allocating to machines or computers versus humans. Now, that's a technological question. We increasingly have the technology so that machines, that computers can do things they weren't able to do in the past. Now, there's a moral and ethical part of that. That's a big part of my research on autonomous weapons. That's a should, and we can talk a little bit about the moral and ethical about some of these applications a little bit later. So autonomy, artificial intelligence, a lot of these terms are frankly oddly, annoyingly devilish to define. One of the reasons, at least in terms of autonomy, is because we would like to think of something as binary. The light switch is either up, it is down, the light is on, the light is off. We want to think of something as it's autonomous or it's not. And that really, frankly, masks the complexity of what's going on with this human-machine interface. So one of the challenges is at what point in time of a machine or a car's operating system are you asking the question about whether it's autonomous? Because at different points as you're driving your car, you are responsible for and doing different things. Your car is responsible for and doing different things. And that changes over the course of where you're driving, how you're driving. So it's oddly challenging. It's deceptively attractive to say something's autonomous or it's not, but it's actually much more complex. I frankly am of the school of thought that there is no such thing as full or fully autonomous, as whatever the system is, a human being built it. A human being wrote the program code. Again, that can also be debated, and you'll see that when we get into cars. Within cars, we do some of the things that I don't advise outside of the automotive aspect, which is have levels. I think levels, again, are a variation of light switch settings. It's attractive, but maybe a little bit deceptive. And we are speaking in full autonomy, and I'll explain why maybe that's okay in the car context, but not in others. One of the things people, I think, like to believe is that autonomy, artificial intelligence, it is a future issue, a future concern that's looming, and it's looming closer, but it's somehow it's always just down the road, just around the corner. We're not actually there yet. And the reality of it is, not only are we there, we've been there, depending, again, how you want to define and what you want to pick as your start point. So we are in the process now of incremental technological advances that over time we will look back on and probably lie to ourselves, and our history will probably lie as if at 2050 all of a sudden their cars were just driverless, and the reality of it is it's going to be that they were increasingly becoming driverless over the course of 20 or 30 years. So here's an example. I don't know if we have any car buffs in the room. I certainly am not a car buff, so I'm not going to act like I could have told you I could have picked that car out of a lineup. On the left, the car on the left is a 1958 Chrysler Imperial. And the reason I picked the 1958 Chrysler Imperial is because this was the first car to employ a device developed in 1948. So it took 10 years for this device, this invention, to come out in a car, and that would be the Cruise-O-Matic, which sadly did not survive. We now just refer to it as cruise control, but this is the first car that had cruise control, or a primitive version of cruise control. So and when you think about what cruise control is, even in 1958, it's you performing much of the driving functions, but in this one small way, in 1958, you had the ability to flip a switch, turn a knob, and the car was going to handle at least maintaining a speed. And that's all. That's all the 1958 Chrysler Imperial was able to do. And obviously, this is or not obviously, but this is a Tesla, which is doing, frankly, infinitely more than our 1958 Chrysler Imperial. And over time, if you want to go back and trace from 1958 to 2018 and the Tesla, there are any number of devices and aspects of driving a car which, again, depending on how we want to define things, are to some aspect autonomous. So for those of you that drove here, which is probably all of us here in the Metroplex, I mean, your cars probably have some version of anti-lock brakes. Maybe you have windshield and windshield wipers that are going to sense when it rains, so it's going to go ahead and take care of that for you. Maybe you have headlights that will actually kind of turn the corner with you. So we have any number of functions right now in the car where, again, we've delegated, allowed, enabled the machine, a computer, to handle those for us. So let's talk about, just in general, about some of the driverless technologies and what it is we're even talking about. So this is my generic driverless car, and we'll just talk a little bit about the sensors and what it is that's allowing it to do what it does. So as a general proposition, we have three different categories of sensors. So the first is that our driverless car employs really a form of radar. A number of useful aspects of radar, including that radar doesn't care about light or dark. Radar detects images. Radar doesn't, frankly, care about fog. Radar doesn't really care. I don't think visibility is probably that great out right now, out on 75. It's a little cloudy, a little misty, a little rainy. That I think impairs our ability to look over our right shoulder and see what's in the other lane. It does not impair radar's ability. So our driverless cars increasingly are incorporating an aspect of radar. There's also one or more cameras. My image here just has the one camera. Some of you already have a car with backup cameras, or maybe even side angle cameras. So we have radar, we have cameras, and we have an array of sensors depending on the car. Uber is currently working on a car that has 8 sensors that can detect objects out to, so 8 sensors, so it has 360-degree sensing around the vehicle out to 250 meters. And that's now. And invariably, that's going to get more, that's going to get better next year and the year after. So I would ask you, it can be either rhetorical or not rhetorical. I don't think there can be any question that cars are able to do and outperform humans in any number of ways and attributes. And that shouldn't be taken as offensive to humans as a species, but we can't detect 360 degrees for 250 meters while we're, oh, by the way, supposedly paying attention to the road in front of us. So what are some of the so whats in terms of driverless cars? So I'm just using now 2015 statistics. This is from the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration. So 2015, we had, actually it was a little bit over 35,000 folks killed, died in motor vehicle accidents here in the US. I'm curious, what percentage of that 35,000 does NHTSA believe was due to human error? Any thoughts? Any guesses? So we have 70? High. So NHTSA says 94. So 94% of the 35,000 were due to human error of some kind. So that leaves us 6%. So what is that 6%? That 6% is actually broken down into 2% categories. 2% of the time, it was actually a problem with the car. Wasn't my fault. Boy, that Toyota Corolla, the 2007 Toyota Corolla, you know that whole ignition thing you were reading about? That's what happened. That's what caused my accident. That accounts for 2%. That accounts for 2% of an accident, some kinds of a defect in the car. We have act of God / weather. So, I mean, a lightning strike, or, you know, the telephone pole happened to come down, you know, on the car or right before the car, whether we're attributing that to weather or to force majeure, act of God, that's another 2%. And then our final 2% is, frankly, we're not sure. So we do have that small error, we have that small window of we're not entirely sure. So 94% of the 35,000 due to human error of some kind or another, ranging from inattentive, driving too fast for conditions, texting driving, drunk driving, fatigue driving. You know, unfortunately, you just missed the car. You look left and you look right, and you did not somehow see that you were pulling out in front of a car. We also know some things statistically about accident rates for newer cars versus some older cars. So interestingly, cars made in 2011 and more recent, so from 2011 to 2017, are involved in half the accidents of cars 2008 and earlier. So now from beyond that, you're going to get into a host of causation, correlation kind of discussions, but it is an interesting kind of data point just to think through that it would appear, I think it's fair to say, that some of our increases in technology are helping us with safety and with accident avoidance. So for proponents of increasingly driverless cars, you know, the idea of reducing that 35,000 is top of the list. And by some estimates, by 2050, we could reduce that 94% by 90%. So we could drastically reduce the 94% of the accidents that are caused by humans. Now, kind of the question mark is, okay, well that sounds great, but what's going to happen to the 2% of vehicle defect? Are we, you know, is that going to increase? As cars we have increasing capabilities, I think we can expect that 2% is going to go up. So I think we can look forward to a reduction in traffic fatalities, but it won't be just a net sum reduction. There will be a reduction in human-caused accidents, and there will be an increase in accidents that we're trying to figure out whether the algorithm, the code, or some aspect of driverless car technology. Sure.
So you think that the 35,000 is going to stay the same?
No, sorry. I was just pointing out I just didn't want to.
Because what the percentage, because right now it's.
So the 35,000, there's 35,000 people dying on the roads, and whatever 94% of 30,000 of the 35 are because we're making mistakes. Of that 30, yeah, so the 30, of that 30,000, some statisticians say we can reduce that portion, the 30,000 of the 35, and I'm doing very rough math saying that 30,000 is 94% of 35, which it's probably not. But that we could reduce that number drastically. We could reduce that 30,000 by 90%. My point though is, so that number, reducing 30,000 by 90% would result in, say, 4,000 or 5,000. My point though is, it's not the other number is also not going to be static. The percentage of accidents that are caused by defects is going to go up. I don't think it's going to go up anywhere near and we're going to have anywhere near. So I'm not saying the number isn't going to change, but I just think we need to factor in that there's going to be some positives and some negatives as these systems become increasingly driverless.
I think what's important to kind of remember too is even though frequency is going down, when there is an accident, the severity is going up. And I think that goes back to even your viewpoint. The severity is going to be absolutely going to go down in those cases.
I mean, and somewhat as, I mean, I may be making your point and cutting against, I mean, interestingly, the last couple of years, I mean, 2016, and I think I've seen some tentative numbers for 2017. Unfortunately, that 35,000 has actually been a little higher. So that's interesting to kind of try to unpack. You know, we're getting more features, side airbags and whatever else. Why is it that that number is gone up a little bit? I think it was 37,000 in 2016 and for 2017. Another aspect for driverless cars is, convenience. Convenience for all of us, but also, frankly, convenience at the outer edges of the spectrum. I mean, right now, you have kids. When can your kids drive? When can you get out of driving them somewhere? Well, it's 15, 16, 17 time frame. Anyone in here? I have a grandmother who only recently did we get to stop driving, God bless her, at 93. And all of the issues surrounding whether, frankly, 93-year-olds should be driving. So when we can reduce this question about driving to really more of, are you okay putting your 12-year-old or your 80-year-old on a bus? Because that, in essence, will be the question that you're asking with some of this driverless technology. Because it won't be, yikes, should the 12-year-old drive themselves to soccer practice? Should the 80-year-old be driving? It'll just be, should they be a passenger? Should they be a passenger in a car that is driving? Individual, you see here a demographic that we don't necessarily think a lot about, but the visually impaired. This is a British gentleman who is, as I understand it, 100% blind. And so the idea of, for people with limited mobility or some other issue that might preclude them from getting a driver's license, being able to drive. I teach criminal law here at SMU over at the law school. We were just speaking about some of these last week in class. And we talked about if you're an epileptic who's had seizures, you're not getting a driver's license, or you're very unlikely, it's going to be very challenging for you to get a driver's license, and then that ripples through, obviously, any number of aspects of your life. One of the interesting aspects about driverless cars is, some people focus on the fact that it's going to be decades before most of the cars are driverless. By some estimates, we won't reach a tipping point in the US until about 2050 is the latest estimate I've seen. So by 2050, more cars will be driverless than not driverless. So that means that we've got a good 20 to 30 years of varying degrees of a mix and match. And we're going to talk a little bit about the ramifications about that, but there's some interesting research that's already being done about the benefits of even having limited numbers of driverless cars on the road with, well, the rest of us who are manning vehicles. So there is no sound to this, which is why it was such a wonderful video for me to test the sound before we started. But what you are seeing here is 20 vehicles. All of them have humans driving the car. The one with the arrow has a human driving the car, and that's what's going on now. And he has just turned the driverless functions on the car on. So the car with the arrow is now driverless. And so 19 cars have human operators, one car is driverless, and just having the one driverless car greatly reduces the stop-start of the entire group. And then they're about to turn the autonomy off. They're about to have our human take the wheel again, and you're going to see Have we just disabled autonomy? And relatively quickly, just those little microseconds of braking, not braking, start to back things up, and the speed of the group is reduced. I'm sorry? It's interesting to see the different ways that companies are approaching this challenge about going driverless, and I would put these in two categories. One is the Google/Uber approach, and frankly, the other is the rest of industry. So what is the differences? The difference is Google and Uber, for reasons I'll talk about in a moment, Google and Uber think, okay, this incremental is not really it's not going to be effective, it's not going to be safe, and really, it's not what we want. So why don't we work on getting to what we really want? And what we really want is, I want to just get in my car and say, take me to SMU, and then I want to be messing around with my phone, I want to be reading the paper, and then I'll look up and the car will announce, arrived at SMU, and I'll get out. That's what Uber and Google think that we want. And so they're working towards, when the Uber and the Google car come out, it will be capable of that. In fact, so that car doesn't need a steering wheel. In fact, Google got into a little bit of an argument with the state of California because Google is visioning a little bit further down the road. So their car wouldn't need a steering wheel because they think that's really where things are going to end up. So let's start working towards that. The problem is California defines a car as having a steering wheel. And so Google tried to explain, yeah, I got it, but we're, visionary Google, we've got all these colors, we do things non-traditionally, we don't need a steering wheel. State of California said, under California revised code, a car is defined. So Google, in essence, had to put, I would say, a fake steering wheel. So Google, at one point, just to be, I think, kind of a little bit of a smartass, put an almost like Fisher-Price-like, fine, if a car has to have a steering wheel, here's the steering wheel, and it's got the little honk. Now the other manufacturers are, I think, would say something to the effect of, yeah, lightning does strike, but the reality of it is technology is incremental. We're gonna have to work through this over the course of years, if not decades, and so the rest of the industry is frankly working on incremental approaches. And again, some of you, they would probably put up the slide I had of the 58 Chrysler Imperial and say we just are continuing to progress. I just bought, my wife and I just bought her a car, and at the end of that, we got to select between, do we want the option where it was going to help us stay in our lane? And so not driverless, but with certainly some additional features beyond cruise control. I mentioned at the outset, one of the challenges is the role of the state versus the federal government. So as a general proposition, the federal government is responsible for motor vehicle safety, while the states are responsible for what do you need to do to be a driver in the state of Texas, and traffic laws for the state of Texas. And that's worked more or less fine in terms of overall motor vehicle safety versus driver licensing and traffic laws. But you can already see that we're going to be in a period of some problems and some difficulties. We have roughly 20 to 25 states that have passed some form of regulation governing driverless cars, but that of course leaves 30 states that have not. And we have the federal government, and I'm not sure how much of this is a function of this administration versus whatever administration is to come, but the current administration's attitude is very hands-off in terms of issuing regulations or rules. So the Department of Transportation, the National Highway Safety Traffic Administration, they're collecting and disseminating things like best practices and guidelines that they would encourage industry leaders to adopt. But you can see it's not too hard to predict. There's going to be a tension where car manufacturers are going to be frustrated with the fact that there isn't a uniform approach, and we can't sell our cars in Tennessee because Tennessee either hasn't passed a law rules, or their laws are, for whatever reason, different than they are in Oklahoma, and that's a problem. So the regulation to date, if you want to call it that, so I mentioned that as a general proposition that speaking about levels can get us into some difficulty, but within the automotive industry, they have come up with these 5 categories or levels. And you'll notice that as we start to get to 4 and 5, both our steering wheel and our human start to get a little fuzzy because they're doing less and then nothing. So where are we right now? Where are we right now is somewhere in the partial to conditional automation. There are a number of manufacturers that have said that 2019, 2020, 2021, they are going to be to level 4. So a vehicle capable of performing all driving functions under certain conditions, and then you have the option of controlling the vehicle. I find level 0 almost kind of amusing. I think level 0 is actually a non sequitur. Unless you are Fred Flintstone and you drive the car that Fred Flintstone drives, which, as you may know, is powered by Fred's big bare feet, your car, unless you have a car older than my 1958 Chrysler Imperial, if you have anything beyond that, your car is performing some of the driving tasks. So this 0 is almost a nullity in my view. So this is the kind of the spectrum that we're on currently, with somewhere in 2 to 3, with 4 as a looming near possibility. In terms of another challenge, I think this idea of hacking, and in the interest of time, I want to save some time for a little of our later discussion, but some of you may have seen, this is from Wired magazine. So about 5-6 years ago, Wired magazine did an exercise, and it was, in essence, it was me driving the car and computer hackers literally in the back seat. They had to be plugged in to the Jeep Cherokee, and while in the back seat and literally plugged into the Jeep Cherokee, they were able to mess with it, if you will. That was a couple years ago. They redid this test 2 years ago, and we'll just watch the very beginning. The hackers are not in the back seat. The hackers are in their basement or wherever it is they want to be in, and they are messing with the car. And from there, it goes into faster, slower, depressing the brake. And so one of the interesting things is, through the entertainment system. So these days, this is that trade-off. We like the fact that we can do real-time traffic updates and that our car can communicate. If your car has the ability to communicate outwards, which is a good thing, and a number of positive things flow from that external communication capability, then something can reach back in. Now again, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's Jeep sending an update, much like your iPhone or your computer are going to update things, or maybe it's these hackers. So it is only a matter of time. Some of you have probably experienced a kind of the scam where you're on your computer and your computer freezes and it says, oh, your computer is locked. If you want access to your computer, send $100 to this. That is absolutely going to happen, where I have gained control of your car and you can file your police report and do whatever, but you're in a hurry and you want access to your car. I can make that happen. $250, Bitcoin, or whatever. So we're going to see some of these types of events occurring. And one of the challenges that it poses for car manufacturers is it can be, I doubt that Jeep I don't know that Jeep makes the entertainment system. They probably outsource, and they probably have someone who's really good at entertainment systems do their entertainment system. But that was the intro into hacking the entire Jeep. So, how is that liability going to work when, I mean, if you are the owner of that Jeep that's just been hacked, you, I think, are very upset, and you turn to Jeep. If you're Jeep, if I'm Jeep, I'm turning to her, the entertainment, you know, whoever made the entertainment system. So that's one of the litigation aspects that I think we're going to be solving. And the other thing we haven't that doesn't touch on in this video is, what about the role of the driver? Because maybe what happened was the driver plugged in their phone. And oh, by the way, their phone has horrible security. And so the inroad into the car was through the driver's phone. You know, I came here this morning with my slides. I had them on a thumb drive, and that was, frankly, it was very convenient, very easy. Folks had wanted me to email them. Slides were too big, so I had a thumb drive. I would tell you, thumb drives are cybersecurity, the bane of cybersecurity existence. They have been, you have not been able to use a thumb drive in a Department of Defense computer for 10 years. So it is interesting. So for all of our, it's great to have those USB ports on our cars, but yeah, the introduction of a thumb drive and the viruses or things on there, or maybe even linking in your computer. I have Apple Play on my car so that it ties into my phone, which can either be a really good thing or a potentially problematic one. Oops, going the wrong way. So what about accidents? And sorry to pick on Tesla, but I just thought that was... So for the next couple of decades, we may have some driverless car on driverless car accidents, but we're going to have an awful lot of driverless car on driven car kinds of accidents. And how is that liability going to work? Well, the first thing that's going to be interesting, and we'll see interesting in terms of who this favors, is, you know, we now have the ability to collect so much information and data from the cars themselves. Whereas, you know, 5-10 years ago, you had to do accident reconstruction and measure skid marks. And, you know, you'd have people that would estimate, well, based on the fact that the fender of the car ended up 50 meters away from the crash and the skid marks were here, and you're doing accident reconstruction. And I'm not saying that that's not a science, but it's not as exact as, frankly, having cameras in the car or the sensor data of, you know, when the brakes were not applied until 1/10 of a second before the collision. So for good or for bad, depending on which side of the equation, our cars are going to be providing a lot of information that I think is going to kind of speed resolution of some of the litigation. An interesting question is, by what standard are we going to be judging our human driver versus our driverless car? We tend to, if it's just a you and me car accident, we're going to talk in terms of negligence. Who was reasonable under the circumstances? Is that the standard that we're going to apply to a driverless car, or is it going to be, frankly, a much higher standard, a strict liability? There was a problem, that's all I need to know. It's going to go on the car manufacturer. So we may have this kind of interesting disparity between the standard by which we hold human drivers accountable and the standard that we apply to our driverless cars. A whole different category of experts. I mentioned normally we might have to have accident reconstruction experts. Now the kind of expert you're going to need is Fred Chang. You're going to need, well, let me actually tell you, having examined the source algorithm code of the Toyota driving program, I identified, you know, the following mistake. So you're going to have source programming experts that are going to be getting into the algorithms for these driverless cars and as the source of accidents. Many believe this is going to revolutionize or massively impact the auto insurance industry. In terms of how insurance is going to work, you know, right now we are insured because we are the ones driving and we are the ones that are causing, what was it? 94% of the fatalities. But as the car is performing increasingly more of, and to the point when we get to where the car is doing the driving, how would insurance work? What is it that I'm actually getting insurance on? Right now you're getting insurance for, frankly, your driving ability, which is why your accident rate factors into your insurance rates. So there's some that believe that auto insurance is really going to change, and the whole model for accidents is going to be much more about like product liability. That it's really going to be that most of our vehicle accidents are going to be assessed within that 2% of the current accident rate of the Toyota Corolla had a defect. Because we're going to get to the point where it's driverless car and driverless car, there's still going to be accidents, but the onus is going to be much more on the manufacturer than the driver. Now, to maybe get a head start on that, it's interesting what some of our manufacturers are already saying. Volvo has issued a guarantee that beginning in 2020, there will not be a fatality in a Volvo. That if you are operating the Volvo in a normal, watch me drive it off a 5-story building, if you're driving and operating the Volvo under normal conditions and are in an accident, they guarantee there will not be a fatality. And there hasn't been a fatality in a Volvo for some time already, so it's not that crazy a claim. Mercedes and a number of other companies that are looking to produce level 4 vehicles have said, you may have some concerns about the fact that the cars can be doing most of the driving. Let me help assuage some of your concerns. If you're using the Mercedes-Benz in a manner to which it was intended and there's an accident, it's on me. It's on Mercedes. So they're already issuing, we've got this, and really it's most in a more of a product liability way. Now it'll be interesting to see to what extent that satisfies maybe our concerns about driverless cars and risk. And I think I already kind of touched on what is going to happen though is increasing litigation and negotiations between the various supply chain manufacturers and car manufacturers as to who's liable for what. I've talked a little bit about the road ahead. Again, you increasingly for the next 20 to 30 years, more functions, more features, humans doing less, and that by 2050, again, the predictions are that most vehicles, a majority of vehicles and trucks on the US roadways will be driverless. So they will be level 4, level 5 vehicles. I just wanted to take just a couple of moments and touch on one or two other aspects of autonomy that aren't moving at all the same speed as we are with driverless cars. And the first is unmanned aerial vehicles or drones. I'll spare you the video. I'll just describe the video. The video is, frankly, is old. The video is 6-7 years old. It's from MIT. And it is MIT having designed an algorithm that allows the plane, that plane, to navigate in a parking garage. So this is not a piloted aircraft is really the key here. There's two keys. There's not a piloted aircraft. This is a plane that's following a code. Much like our car is going to be following its code and using sensors, our plane is following the code and using its sensors, and it flies around this parking garage where the wingspan, it has something like 3 or 4 inches of clearance on each side of the wing, and it's flying at 25, 30 miles an hour through the parking garage, and it does that for about 20 minutes until they decide, okay, I think we've proven the point, and they stop. And I would tell you, when you look at that, I don't care how skilled the human pilot would be, that thing would have crashed into the wall or a vehicle very quickly. So again, this shouldn't be surprising, but machines and with our technology, they're capable of performing in ways and in levels that we simply are not. So that leads us to Amazon. And some of you maybe even saw Amazon 60 Minutes, and Amazon was on the cusp, and they are gonna deliver. And here we are, and it's 2018, and pretty sure none of you, at least here in the US, have gotten your package delivery from Amazon. Why not? And I'm sure that's true. It's just one of the last places it's going to be is the United States. And the second to last place is probably, in close order, would be Western Europe. And the reason is because that's the most densely congested airspace. So in terms of deconflicting airspace, United States, Western Europe are going to be the last. And then conversely, this is kind of a leaping technology. So interestingly, the less robust your air system is, the more use you're going to be able to use of this. So much like cell phones, frankly, took off in Africa, and they were using cell phones and doing micro banking with cell phones while we were still even figuring out cell phones. They're already using this package delivery in Tanzania and in parts of Africa because, frankly, they don't have the aerial congestion issues. So I think we're going to learn a lot from the use of these delivery systems in other settings, but we're going to be relatively slow in getting them, certainly by comparison to what you see with driverless cars. Just as a kind of a last note or two, so I mean, autonomy again is rippling through and is impacting so many different aspects of our society. And I've just picked just a couple of intentionally random examples. This is autonomy in the form of AI doing job interviews. Increasingly, the first round of interviews that some of our SMU students and others are going to engage in, that job interview is going to be an avatar on a computer screen, and it is going to be a computer program that is asking them questions and that is recording their answers and also making measurements of their facial expressions as they go through the interview. So to get through that first round of interview, you're going to have to get through a robot, or in this case, an artificial intelligence interview program. This is a admittedly bizarre application. This is Hotel Concierge in Japan. There are some hotels in Japan where if you show up to the hotel, if you speak Japanese, you will interact with the Japanese-speaking, human-formed robot with an AI program. For God knows what reason, if you do not speak Japanese, you will interact with the dinosaur who speaks every other language besides Japanese. This is the BeachBot. The BeachBot does random sand art on beaches, does it autonomously. You just program it, here's the image I want, and it goes out each day and does sand art. That is a artificial intelligence generated painting that is on sale, either was on sale or will be on sale at Christie's for the first time. So Christie's is going to be auctioning an AI-produced art. And frankly, even just saying AI-produced art gets some of my intellectual property colleagues kind of worked up about what does that even mean? Who is the intellectual property holder? The last thing I should of course note, and they referenced this in the Amazon video, obviously with the hacking, not all of this will be to the good. There has already been uses of technology for bad. This is use of a primitive drone badly to try to smuggle methamphetamine into the United States. This is the type of small little quadcopter that a drug gang employed several of, and when the FBI was staking out their location, the drug gang employed the drones, which posted surveillance video to YouTube. So the drug gang, wherever it was able to go online, to go to YouTube, to get the surveillance feed of what the FBI agents were doing. And this is an Iraqi soldier who is holding the remnants of an ISIS drone. And you may have seen President Maduro in Venezuela in the last month was subject to, it would appear, not an effectual, but at least an attempt at a drone assassination. So that we are going to see instances of misuse, of hacking. And I think it's going to create this interesting tension about what is it we think about increasing machine autonomy and in functions and in applications where human lives are at issue. So robotic pharmacy, robotic surgery. This is an image from an experiment that was done using 12 pigs, so 3 groups of 4 pigs had the same procedure performed on them. It was a vivisection of the intestines. So the first group of 4 pigs has Dr. Smith, the human surgeon. Second group of 4 pigs has Dr. Smith with robotic assistance. Third group of 4 pigs has Surgery 4000, which is a series of tools and implements that follow the code that has been built in. The outcomes for the surgeries were the highest for not involving Dr. Smith at all, only having the robot, the Surgery 4000, if you will. Second highest were Dr. Smith with robotic and AI assistance, and the least good outcomes were Dr. Smith, who we all know and love and lives down the street, but at the end of the day, I think I'm most concerned with the best outcome I can have at surgery. So it'll be interesting to see how we kind of balance those tensions. We already know, frankly, that robotic pharmacists don't make mistakes. That our human pharmacists are amazingly accurate. Their error rate is, 1 out of every 100,000 transactions. But they have an error rate. And the robotic pharmacists thus far haven't messed up once. And what we care about is making sure that we get the right meds, maybe then we should be more receptive to that. So one of the things that we'll all be experiencing and be a part of going forward is, what is our attitude towards our performance versus that of machines? And what is our attitude about human-caused fatalities versus machine-caused fatalities? I certainly don't mean to make light of the woman in Arizona who was killed by an Uber, a self-driving Uber, while an inattentive human was sitting behind the wheel. But I just note, again, no disrespect to that woman. It's very unfortunate she lost her life. That was one woman. That was one person. There were 34,000 others. Who were they? We don't know, and I don't want to say that we don't care, but we've just become numb, or we're just accustomed to all the other accidents. So we have a fixation with the driverless car fatality. What about the other 34,000? And if we could reduce those, shouldn't we want to do that? Well, I don't want to keep you from lunch or delaying your program. Sorry, we were a little sped at the end, but thank you very much for your time. I'll be around if you have any questions or comments. I'd love to get some of your cards. Thank you.